Grant Mercer handed his pregnant wife a trash bag and told her to pack only what she had personally earned. Eleanor Hayes looked at the black plastic bag in his hand. For one strange second, her mind did not go to betrayal. It went to the absurd detail that he had chosen the cheap kitchen bags, the thin ones that tore if a cereal box corner pressed too hard against the side. That was what 7 years of marriage had become. Not a suitcase. Not a conversation. A trash bag. Grant stood in the doorway of their penthouse in a charcoal suit, his blonde hair combed back, his mouth fixed into the calm expression he used when firing people. Behind him, a young woman leaned against the marble kitchen island, wearing Eleanor's cream cashmere cardigan. The cardigan still had Eleanor's grandmother's pearl button on the cuff. The girl saw Eleanor looking and smiled. Not widely. Just enough. Grant followed Eleanor's gaze and did not look embarrassed. "Tessa will be staying here," he said. Eleanor's fingers tightened around the edge of the doorframe. She was 12 weeks pregnant. The morning sickness had not fully passed. Her body felt both fragile and unfamiliar, as if every nerve had moved closer to the surface overnight. Still, she did not touch her stomach. She would not give them that. Tessa Vale was 26, all glossy blonde hair, narrow waist, and the kind of soft pink mouth that made cruelty look like innocence until she spoke. She worked in Grant's office as a client relations associate, though Eleanor had heard enough late-night calls to understand she had been relating to one client in particular. Grant lifted the trash bag. "You have until 9. Eleanor stared at him. "For what?" "To collect what belongs to you." The words were delivered neatly, almost legally. Grant enjoyed sounding reasonable when he was being monstrous. Eleanor looked past him into the living room she had decorated slowly over 5 years. The hand-woven rug from Vermont. The walnut dining table she had found in a closed estate sale. The blue glass bowl near the window, where she kept keys, receipts, and once, when Grant still kissed her while passing through rooms, movie tickets from dates they never had time to take. "What belongs to me," she repeated. Grant exhaled, already impatient. "Eleanor, do not make this dramatic." Tessa lowered her eyes and adjusted the cardigan sleeve as if the pearl button were hers to admire. Eleanor's nausea sharpened. Grant stepped closer. "I have arranged for a temporary protective order. My attorney is downstairs with the paperwork. Given your emotional state and your refusal to accept the reality of this marriage, it is better if you leave quietly." "My emotional state? You have been unstable since the pregnancy." "The baby," Eleanor said. Grant's jaw flexed. "We will discuss custody when there is something to discuss." The sentence struck harder than the affair. For a moment Eleanor heard nothing except the heating system humming above the ceiling and the tiny click of Tessa's fingernail against a coffee cup. Then Grant said the words that would later ruin him. "Tessa is an upgrade. She understands the future I am building. She is ambitious, presentable, and useful in rooms that matter." He looked Eleanor up and down. His gaze paused on her loose gray sweater, her tired eyes, the softness pregnancy had already brought to her face. "You were sweet when we married," he said. "But sweetness is not enough. You have no career momentum, no earning power, no network of your own. I cannot keep dragging you into a life you do not fit." Tessa's mouth curved again. Eleanor did not cry. That seemed to irritate him. He pushed the trash bag into her hand. "Pack." She took it. The plastic crackled between them, loud in the silent hallway. Across from the penthouse, a neighbor's door had opened an inch. Eleanor saw one cautious eye, then darkness as the door closed again. Grant noticed too. His voice dropped. "Do not embarrass me." Eleanor looked at him for a long moment. That was when something inside her went still. Not numb. Still. There is a kind of quiet that arrives when pain has gone too far to be processed as pain. It becomes information. The angle of his shoulders. The borrowed cardigan. The attorney downstairs. The timing. The baby. The order. The arrogance. Eleanor folded all of it away. Then she walked past him into the bedroom. Tessa called after her lightly. "Do not take anything from the closet that Grant bought." Eleanor stopped. Grant said nothing. That silence was its own confession. She entered the bedroom, opened the wardrobe, and packed exactly 4 things into the trash bag. Her passport, her medical file, a framed photograph of her late grandmother, Beatrice Hartwell, standing in front of an old brick apartment building in 1997, and a sealed navy envelope she had hidden behind winter scarves for 3 years. On the front, in Beatrice's elegant handwriting, were 8 words. "Open this when they make you feel homeless." Eleanor placed the envelope against her chest. Then she walked out of the penthouse she had never told Grant she owned. Chapter 2. The attorney downstairs was younger than Eleanor expected. He stood near the marble lobby desk with a leather folder tucked under one arm, and the stiff posture of someone hoping cruelty looked more professional when printed on heavy paper. "Mrs. Mercer," he said. Eleanor looked at the name badge clipped to his suit. Owen Blythe, Associate Counsel, Mercer Ward Capital. That meant Grant had used company legal resources to remove his pregnant wife from their home. Useful. Eleanor had begun thinking in that word. Useful. Every insult had become useful. Every document, every witness, every small mistake made by people who thought her too shaken to count. Owen opened the folder. "This notice requires that you vacate Unit 3901 pending review of domestic safety concerns." "Domestic safety concerns," Eleanor repeated. Her voice was calm enough that Owen glanced up. She was pale, yes. Her hair was pulled into a loose auburn knot. There were faint shadows beneath her gray eyes. But nothing about her looked wild. That seemed to trouble him. "Mrs. Mercer, I do not write the documents. I deliver them." "Then deliver this answer to the person who wrote it," Eleanor said. "I will comply with the temporary request under protest, and I will expect full digital copies by noon." Owen blinked. "You have counsel?" "Not yet." He relaxed. She noticed. The lobby guard, Martin, stood behind the desk pretending to look at the visitor log. Martin had worked in the building for 9 years. He had accepted Christmas cookies from Eleanor, helped carry grocery boxes, and once called a plumber when Grant had ignored a leaking pipe for 2 days. Now he looked miserable. "Do you need a car, Mrs. Mercer?" he asked softly. "Grant told you not to help me." Martin's face flushed. Eleanor almost smiled. "Thank you for being honest without speaking." She signed nothing. She took a copy of the notice. She walked to the lobby bench beside the east windows and sat down with the trash bag at her feet. Morning light fell across the floor in gold rectangles. People entered and left the building around her, pretending not to stare. Some recognized her as Grant Mercer's wife. No one recognized her as anything else. That had been the point. For 3 years, Eleanor had allowed Grant to describe her as a former art history lecturer taking a break. She let his mother call her gentle. She let his colleagues assume she came from a small family with old furniture and no money. She let people use her quiet as proof that there was nothing behind it, because Beatrice had taught her that visible wealth was often the least protected kind. Eleanor looked down at the navy envelope. The seal was still intact. Her grandmother had given it to her 2 months before she died, sitting in a sunlit room that smelled of lavender soap and old paper. Beatrice Hartwell had been a white-haired woman with bird-thin wrists, sharp blue eyes, and a habit of wearing plain wool cardigans over dresses worth more than cars. She had spent most of her life being dismissed as a widowed school librarian who rented out a few apartments. In truth, she had quietly built the largest private property portfolio in the city. Eleanor knew there was money. She did not know how much. That ignorance had been partly grief and partly choice. After Beatrice died, Eleanor had been newly married to Grant and desperate for peace. She attended the trust meetings, signed where the attorneys told her to sign, and placed the larger documents into storage because the numbers made her feel like she was standing too close to a cliff. Grant had asked about her inheritance twice. She had said it was complicated. He had lost interest when she did not offer him access. Now, sitting in the lobby of a building whose deed might already be connected to her name, Eleanor broke the seal. Inside was a letter, a key card, and a folded ownership summary. The letter was only 1 page. "My Ellie, if you are opening this, someone has mistaken your silence for helplessness. Do not correct them with anger. Correct them with paperwork. Everything is held under Hartwell Urban Trust. You are the sole beneficiary and controlling trustee upon my death. The Mercer name has no claim unless you gift it one. Do not gift what women before you survive to build. Call Vivian Cross. She knows where every wall is. Remember this. A house is shelter. A portfolio is leverage. Peace is ownership of the door. Grandmother B." Eleanor read the letter twice. On the 3rd reading, her eyes blurred. She did not wipe them immediately. She allowed 3 tears to fall, quiet and hot, onto the paper. Then she unfolded the ownership summary. 73 residential buildings. 12 commercial towers. 4 landmark event venues. 2 parking structures. Controlling interest in 3 redevelopment districts. Hartwell Tower, current residence of Grant and Eleanor Mercer. Unit 3901 included under family occupancy license. Eleanor stared at the line until it sharpened. Hartwell Tower. Not Mercer Tower. Not Grant's penthouse. Hartwell. The attorney upstairs had served her a vacate notice in her own building. Eleanor touched her stomach for the first time that morning. The baby was too small to answer, but the gesture steadied her. Then she took out her phone and called the number written at the bottom of the letter. Vivian Cross answered on the second ring. Eleanor Hartwell Hayes, she said, her voice low, precise, and entirely unsurprised. I wondered how long it would take them to make you open the envelope. Eleanor closed her eyes. I need to know what I own. Vivian replied, you own the city that just watched him throw you out. Chapter 3. Grant Mercer had not always been cruel. That was the detail Eleanor hated most. If he had been obviously rotten from the beginning, she could have forgiven herself faster. But the man she met at a charity restoration dinner 7 years earlier had been attentive, funny, and almost painfully eager to be seen as good. He had asked about the medieval chapel mural she was helping restore. Not in the polite way people ask so they can return to discussing themselves, but with real curiosity. He wanted to know why blue pigment mattered, why old plaster cracked, why preservation deserved money when new buildings needed funding. Eleanor had answered. Grant had listened. For a woman raised by a grandmother who valued silence, and by boarding schools that mistook reserve for arrogance, listening had felt like love. Their first year was gentle. Grant brought coffee to her lectures. He held her hand in public. He introduced her as brilliant before he began introducing her as sweet. The difference arrived quietly enough that Eleanor did not defend against it. By the second year, he corrected her stories at dinner. By the third, he suggested she leave teaching because his schedule was demanding and one flexible partner made more sense. By the fourth, he called her anxious when she asked why Tessa Vale texted him after midnight. By the fifth, his mother, Celeste Mercer, began arriving without notice. Celeste was a woman of polished bones and expensive restraint. Her silver blonde hair never moved. Her bracelets made a soft sound when she lifted a wine glass, as if even her judgment had accessories. She had never shouted at Eleanor. Shouting would have been too honest. Instead, Celeste made observations. Eleanor, that dress is brave on you. Eleanor, Grant needs a wife who can keep up socially. Eleanor, some women bloom during pregnancy, but you seem to be retreating into yourself. Grant never stopped her. Sometimes he frowned, as if disapproving privately. But he never spoke. Silence, Eleanor learned, could be a family language. Tessa entered that language fluently. At first she was merely the young employee with the quick laugh. Then the employee who appeared at client dinners. Then the one who knew which bourbon Grant preferred. Then the one who posted a photo from a private golf club wearing a man's watch Eleanor recognized on the table beside her cocktail. When Eleanor asked, Grant looked wounded. Do you hear yourself? He said. She is 26 and works for me. Are you really threatened by a junior associate? Eleanor apologized. That became another pattern. She apologized for noticing. She apologized for asking. She apologized for not being fun anymore, for being tired, for being pregnant, for needing rest, for not wanting Celeste to criticize her body over lunch. The night before Grant threw her out, he hosted a family dinner. Eleanor cooked because Celeste said catered food felt cold in family matters. She roasted salmon, made lemon potatoes, set out asparagus, warmed bread, and kept one hand pressed against her lower back while moving between stove and sink. Grant's sister, Lydia, arrived with her husband. Celeste came with orchids. Two of Grant's partners came unexpectedly. Then Tessa walked in carrying nothing but a small silver purse. Eleanor looked at Grant. He did not look back. At dinner, Celeste raised her glass. I think we should acknowledge transitions, she said. Eleanor's fork paused. Grant sat at the head of the table, where Beatrice's old walnut chair stood. He had always liked that chair. He said it made him feel grounded. Eleanor now understood he had liked sitting on inheritance he did not respect. Grant cleared his throat. This family is entering a new phase. Lydia looked down at her plate. One partner shifted in his chair. Tessa smiled at her wineglass. Eleanor felt the room arranging itself around a truth everyone had rehearsed except her. Grant continued. I have spent years trying to make my marriage work, but compatibility matters. Ambition matters. Presentation matters. Celeste's face showed solemn approval. Eleanor looked at Tessa's red mouth, at the tiny flash of excitement she failed to hide. Grant turned to Eleanor at last. I will always care about you, he said, but I cannot let loyalty to the past prevent me from choosing a better future. The humiliation had been staged. Not a confession in private. Not a request for separation. A dinner performance, with his mother as witness and his mistress as prize. Eleanor stood. Her knees felt unsteady, but her voice did not. I am pregnant. Tessa's smile thinned. Grant looked irritated, not moved. We are aware. We. That single word moved through Eleanor with icy precision. Celeste set down her glass. Pregnancy is not a marriage plan, dear. Grant said, we will be fair. Eleanor looked around the table. No one met her eyes for long. That night, after everyone left, Grant slept in the guest room. At dawn, his attorney arrived. By breakfast, Tessa was wearing the cardigan. And now, 3 hours later, Eleanor sat in Vivian Cross's private office above the financial district, watching the full architecture of her grandmother's life appear across a glass conference table. Vivian was a black woman in her early 60s with close-cropped gray hair, rimless glasses, and the calm expression of someone who had watched wealthy men panic for decades. She had been Beatrice Hartwell's attorney for 24 years. She placed document after document in front of Eleanor. Hartwell Urban Trust. Asset schedule. Occupancy licenses. Commercial lease map. Beneficiary control statement. Premarital exclusion protections. Eleanor read until the words began to settle into power. Grant has no claim? She asked. None. The trust predates the marriage. You never commingled the assets. He signed acknowledgments during the first year, though I doubt he read them. Eleanor gave a small, humorless laugh. He always said paperwork was my nervous habit. Vivian's eyes softened. It was your grandmother's armor. Eleanor looked at the map of properties. Mercer Ward Capital's headquarters were highlighted. So was Celeste's luxury stationery boutique. So was the hotel ballroom where Grant was scheduled to receive the City Builders Vision Award in 3 weeks. Eleanor touched one highlighted line. He built his career inside my grandmother's buildings. Vivian folded her hands. Yes. And he called Tessa an upgrade in my kitchen. Vivian did not smile. Then we should make sure he understands the cost of renovation. Chapter for the first legal move was quiet. At 4 o'clock that afternoon, Owen Blythe received a letter from Vivian Cross on behalf of Hartwell Urban Trust. It stated that his morning notice had been improperly served, factually defective, and directed at the controlling trustee of the property. It demanded immediate withdrawal and preservation of all communications related to the alleged safety concerns. At 4:17, Owen called Grant. Grant did not answer because he was shopping with Tessa. That detail would later become one of Eleanor's favorites. While his attorney was learning that Grant had tried to evict his wife from her own trust property, Grant was watching Tessa hold up silk dresses in a boutique and ask whether cream made her look expensive. At 4:26, Owen called again. Grant stepped outside. What? Owen spoke quickly. There is an issue with the unit. What issue? Ownership. Grant looked through the boutique window at Tessa turning before a mirror in a dress that cost more than Eleanor's first car. What about ownership? The penthouse is part of Hartwell Urban Trust. Grant frowned. Eleanor's family thing? Yes. So? Owen paused. Your wife is the controlling trustee. Grant almost laughed. No, she is not. I have documents from Vivian Cross. That name Grant recognized. Everyone in city development recognized Vivian Cross. She had a reputation for making careless men feel literate only after it was too late. Grant's smile vanished. Send them. He opened the files on his phone in the boutique doorway. Trust certification. Occupancy agreement. Spousal acknowledgement signed by Grant Mercer 4 years earlier. He remembered signing something during a refinancing conversation. Eleanor had placed the documents in front of him and said Vivian needed routine confirmations for family assets. He had been late for a flight. He signed without reading. Now his signature looked back at him like a witness. Tessa opened the boutique door. Grant, do you like this one? He did not answer. She frowned. Grant. He shoved the phone into his pocket. Buy it. You did not even look. Buy whatever you want. That had once thrilled Tessa. Today it sounded like dismissal. Back at Vivian's office, Eleanor was reviewing the safety order. The accusation was laughably thin. Grant claimed she had raised her voice during a private argument, refused to accept marital separation, and created emotional distress in the residents. There was no physical allegation, no police report, no medical record, no witness statement except Grant's. Vivian tapped the page. This was not meant to win. It was meant to frighten you. It did. You still left with evidence. Eleanor looked down at the navy envelope beside her. My grandmother said not to speak until the paperwork could. Good advice. There is one more thing, Eleanor said. She took out her phone and played the voice recording from the hallway. Grant's voice filled the office. Tessa is an upgrade. She understands the future I am building. Eleanor watched Vivian's expression harden by degrees. Is the recording legal? Eleanor asked. In this state, yes. One-party consent. Then use it only if necessary. Vivian studied her. You do not want revenge? Eleanor thought about Grant's face in the doorway. Tessa's hand on the pearl button. Celeste saying pregnancy was not a marriage plan. I do, she said honestly. But I want it to survive court. Vivian smiled for the first time. Then you are Beatrice's granddaughter. That night, Eleanor did not return to the penthouse. She stayed in a small suite at the Hartwell House, a landmark hotel near the river that she had visited with Beatrice as a child. Back then, she thought her grandmother simply liked the lobby's brass lamps and quiet service. Now she knew Beatrice owned the building through a holding company and had restored it without ever putting her name on the wall. The manager, a woman named Simone, met Eleanor personally. Mrs. Mercer, your grandmother kept Suite 8 reserved for family use. We prepared it as soon as Ms. Cross called. Eleanor touched the back of a chair near the window. Beatrice had chosen everything. The green velvet sofa, the writing desk, the framed botanical prints. For the first time that day, Eleanor sat down somewhere no one could throw her out. At 9:40, Grant called. She let it ring. He called again, then texted. We need to talk. There are misunderstandings. She looked at the message for a long time. Misunderstandings. Such a small word for a trash bag. She typed nothing. At 10:15, Tessa posted a photo from the penthouse balcony. New beginnings feel lighter. Eleanor stared at it. The city glittered behind Tessa. Eleanor's cardigan hung over her shoulders. Grant's hand was visible at the edge of the frame, holding 2 glasses of champagne. For 1 second, pain punched through the stillness. Then Eleanor sent the screenshot to Vivian. The reply came 30 seconds later. Excellent. Unauthorized commercial use of trust residence. Preserve everything. Eleanor set the phone down. Tessa thought she had posted a victory. She had posted evidence. Chapter 5. Grant tried charm first. The next morning, flowers arrived at Hartwell House. White roses. Eleanor had always disliked white roses because they browned at the edges before admitting they were dying. The card read, Ellie yesterday got out of hand. Come home so we can discuss this privately. She gave the flowers to the hotel lobby. An hour later, Grant arrived in person. Simone called up from the front desk. Mr. Mercer is here. He says he is your husband. Eleanor stood by the window overlooking the river. Is he calm? He is performing calm. That made Eleanor smile. Send him to the private sitting room. I will bring counsel. Grant hated that. She knew because when she entered with Vivian at her side, his face tightened for half a second before smoothing over. Eleanor, he said softly. That voice had once worked on her. It had softened arguments, delayed decisions, pulled apologies from her mouth when she had done nothing wrong. Now it sounded like a key being pushed into a lock that had been changed. Grant looked at Vivian. I was hoping to speak to my wife alone. Vivian sat. Then you should not have sent an attorney to remove her from her home. Grant's eyes flashed. Eleanor lowered herself into the chair opposite him. You have 10 minutes. He looked wounded. Is this what we are now? You decided what we are in front of Tessa. He exhaled. Tessa was a mistake in how it happened. Not in that it happened. His silence answered. Grant leaned forward. I handled yesterday badly. I admit that. But you need to understand, I have been suffocating. Vivian wrote one word on her legal pad. Eleanor did not look at it, but she could guess. Deflection. Grant continued. You withdrew from me. You stopped caring how you looked. You gave up your career. You made the apartment feel like a museum. I needed life. Tessa gave me that. Eleanor looked at the man she had once loved and felt the odd sadness of seeing him clearly. You wanted applause, she said. Not life. His jaw tightened. You always do this. What? Make yourself morally superior. No, Grant. I made dinner while you arranged to humiliate me. His face reddened. Vivian turned a page. Grant shifted strategy. Fine. We were both unhappy, but we can avoid war. I will let you remain in one of the smaller apartments during the pregnancy. We can create a reasonable support arrangement. I will keep the penthouse. Tessa does not need to be involved in any legal discussion. For the first time, Eleanor laughed. It was not loud. That made it worse. Grant frowned. You will let me remain in one of the smaller apartments? He realized the mistake a second too late. Eleanor leaned back. Grant, do you know what Hartwell Urban Trust owns? He looked at Vivian. I know enough. No, Eleanor said. You know what you assumed. Vivian placed a red folder on the table and opened it. Grant's eyes dropped. Asset map. Lease schedule. Mercer Ward Capital Headquarters, floors 22 through 27, under favorable legacy lease with Hartwell Urban Trust. Celeste Mercer's Boutique, the Mercer Paper House, under commercial lease with Hartwell Retail Holdings. Hartwell Tower, including Unit 3901. The Hartwell House Hotel, where Grant currently sat. The Grand Veron Ballroom, venue for the City Builders Gala. The Ashford parking structure, attached to Mercer Ward's downtown office. His mouth opened, then closed. Eleanor watched each realization arrive. No one had hit him. No one had shouted. The numbers did it better. "This is your grandmother's," he said. "Mine now." His eyes lifted to hers. "You hid this from me." There it was. The injured tone of a man who had mistaken lack of access for deception. Eleanor's voice stayed even. "You dismissed it. You should have told me. You should have asked who you were throwing out before you handed me a trash bag." The room went silent. Grant looked smaller in it. Then fear made him unkind. "You think money makes you powerful? You still cannot run any of this. You are a lecturer who quit. You have no idea how development works." Vivian looked at Eleanor, waiting. Eleanor stood. Meeting over. Grant rose too. "Ellie, do not call me that." He flinched. Eleanor walked to the door, then paused. "One more thing. Tessa needs to leave the penthouse by 6 tonight. If she posts another photograph from trust property, legal will proceed directly." Grant's expression hardened. "And if I refuse?" Vivian answered this time. "Then tomorrow, every tenant, lender, investor, and commercial partner connected to Mercer Ward receives a formal notice of ownership and compliance review." Grant looked between them. For the first time, he understood the trash bag had not been the ending. It had been the first exhibit. Chapter 6. Tessa did not leave by 6. She went live at 5:43 instead. Eleanor watched from the hotel suite with ginger tea in one hand and a folder of medical forms beside her. On screen, Tessa sat on the penthouse sofa under soft lighting, her blonde hair falling in practiced waves. Eleanor's cardigan was gone. In its place, she wore a pale blue blouse and an expression carefully arranged between hurt and bravery. "I never wanted to speak publicly," Tessa began. Eleanor said, "Of course." Vivian on speakerphone asked, "Is she still in the unit?" "Yes." "Good." Tessa continued. "There are people with old money who think they can bully younger women into silence. I fell in love with someone whose marriage was already over. I will not apologize for being chosen." The comments exploded. Some supported her. Many did not. Chosen for what? "Girl, why are you in his wife's house? Is that the penthouse from Grant's magazine profile?" Tessa's eyes flicked to the comments. Her smile trembled, then returned. Eleanor paused the video and took a screenshot of the background. The Hartwell Tower terrace doors were visible behind her. So was a framed architectural drawing Beatrice had purchased in Florence. She sent it to Vivian. Vivian replied, "Perfect." At 6:12, building security knocked on the penthouse door. Grant opened it furious. 2 officers stood behind the building manager. Not police officers. Trust compliance officers, retired investigators hired by Vivian years earlier for exactly this kind of problem. The senior officer was a woman in a black suit named Mara Ellison. "Mr. Mercer, this unit is held under family occupancy license granted to Eleanor Hayes Mercer. Unauthorized guests have been asked to vacate." Grant laughed once. "Unauthorized guests?" Tessa appeared behind him, phone still in hand. Mara looked past Grant. "Ms. Vale, your continued presence after written notice constitutes trespass under the occupancy terms. You may leave voluntarily now." "This is insane," Tessa said. Mara's expression did not change. "It is contractual." Tessa turned to Grant. "Do something." Grant looked at the officers, the building manager, the camera still live on Tessa's phone, and understood that anything he did would be recorded from several angles. The live comments caught fire. "Is she getting removed from the wife's apartment? This cannot be real. Upgrade just got downgraded in real time." Tessa ended the live stream with a shaking thumb. 20 minutes later, paparazzi caught her leaving through the side entrance with 2 designer bags and a face white with fury. By midnight, the clip had spread across every local gossip account. Grant Mercer throws pregnant wife out. Mistress removed from wife's trust-owned penthouse. Eleanor did not comment. Her silence worked harder than any statement. Celeste called at 7 o'clock the next morning. Eleanor answered because Vivian told her not every call should be ignored. Some should be recorded. Celeste's voice was cold enough to frost glass. "You have made a spectacle of this family." "Good morning, Celeste." Do not patronize me. Whatever Grant did, you had no right to humiliate him publicly. Eleanor sat at the writing desk. The river moved gray beneath the window. Grant humiliated himself publicly when he let his mistress broadcast from property he does not own. You are vindictive. I am organized. Celeste inhaled sharply. Do you know who we are? Yes, Eleanor said. Tenants. The silence that followed was worth every sleepless night. Celeste recovered quickly, but not fully. You would not dare interfere with my business. Your lease is under review. My lease? The Mercer Paper House occupies Unit 5 of Hartwell Arcade under a courtesy rate arranged by my grandmother before I married Grant. That courtesy depended on family relationship and goodwill. Both are being reassessed. Celeste's voice changed. Eleanor. For years, Eleanor had heard her name from Celeste as an inconvenience. Now it came out like a plea that hated itself. I will have Vivian send documents, Eleanor said. You cannot do this to me. I accepted you into this family. No, Celeste. You tolerated me because you thought I was harmless. Celeste said nothing. Eleanor's hand rested over her stomach. I am not harmless anymore. Chapter 7 Grant's company began to shake before the week ended. Mercer Ward Capital occupied 6 floors of the Westbridge Tower under a lease negotiated during the second year of Grant's marriage. He had bragged about that lease for years, calling it proof of his ability to secure impossible terms. Now he knew the truth. The terms were impossible because Beatrice Hartwell had quietly approved them as a favor to her granddaughter's husband. He had built his image on generosity he never knew he had received. On Friday morning, the firm's senior partner, Henry Ward, called an emergency meeting. Grant walked into the conference room expecting irritation. He found fear. Henry sat at the head of the table with 3 printed letters arranged before him. The chief financial officer stood by the screen. 2 outside council representatives waited near the wall. Grant slowed. What is this? Henry did not offer him a seat. Hartwell Urban Trust has initiated a compliance review of our lease, our parking agreement, and the redevelopment introductions tied to the South River project. Grant adjusted his cuff. Eleanor is emotional. This will pass. Henry stared at him. Did you attempt to remove the controlling trustee of our primary landlord from her residence using company counsel? Grant's mouth tightened. It was a domestic matter. Did you use Owen Blythe on company time? Grant looked at Owen, who stood pale near the window. Owen stared at the carpet. Henry's voice dropped. Did you house your extramarital partner in trust property and allow her to broadcast from it after notice? Grant felt the room closing. I was under pressure. The CFO spoke. Northridge Bank called. They want clarification before releasing the South River financing. That financing was the spine of Grant's year. Without it, his award at the gala would look ridiculous. His expansion plan would stall. His reputation would bruise in places no tailor could cover. Grant looked at Henry. We can manage Eleanor. No, Henry said. You clearly cannot. The words landed hard. Henry continued. Until further notice, you are recused from all negotiations involving properties connected to Hartwell Urban Trust. You cannot recuse me from my own accounts. We can when your personal conduct creates material risk. Grant looked around the table and saw it. The subtle withdrawal. Men who had laughed at his jokes now measured distance in inches. People who had once envied him had begun preparing to survive him. He left the meeting with a folder of restrictions and the sour knowledge that no one had shouted because no one needed to. That afternoon, Tessa called him from a hotel room. Her voice was thin. My agency suspended me. Grant closed his office door. Temporarily? They said brands are concerned. This will calm down. Will it? Because clips of me being removed from your wife's building have 8 million views. Grant rubbed his forehead. Tessa, I am handling it. No, she snapped. You said she was nobody. You said she was living off you. Grant's silence betrayed him. Tessa laughed once, sharp and ugly. You did not know. He said nothing. Oh my God. You did not know your wife owned the apartment. Grant looked through the glass wall at the city. Tessa's voice changed from panic to calculation. How much does she own? Enough. What does that mean? It means do not post anything else. Tessa went quiet. Then she said, you made me look stupid. Grant almost laughed at the unfairness of it. Me? Yes, you. I would never have walked into this if I knew she could ruin me. That sentence stripped away the last illusion. Tessa had not loved him. Not the way he imagined. She loved access, reflected status, the idea of being chosen over a wife. Now that the wife had become more powerful than the choosing, the romance had lost its shape. He heard himself say, "I left my marriage for you." "No, Grant. You left your marriage because you thought you could trade up." Then she hung up. He stared at the dead phone. For one flickering second, he saw himself as Eleanor must have seen him that morning in the doorway. Not powerful, not visionary, just a man holding a trash bag, certain the woman in front of him had nowhere better to go. The thought was unbearable, so he buried it under anger. Chapter 8. Eleanor's first prenatal appointment after the separation was on a rainy Tuesday. She went alone. That mattered to her more than she expected. The clinic waiting room smelled faintly of disinfectant and coffee. Couples sat together, whispering over ultrasound photos. A woman near the window laughed as her husband tried to assemble a stroller from a box on his phone screen. Eleanor watched them and felt a small, sharp grief. Not envy exactly. More like mourning a version of her life that had existed only because she kept feeding it hope. When the nurse called her name, Eleanor stood with one hand over her stomach. The exam room was cool. The paper on the table crackled beneath her. The doctor, a kind woman named Dr. Marin, asked careful questions that suggested she had seen more broken households than most judges. "Are you safe where you are staying?" "Yes." "Do you have legal support?" "Yes." "Do you want Grant listed as an approved medical contact?" Eleanor paused. For years, wife had meant automatic access. Husband had meant emergency contact, legal companion, first call. Now each checkbox felt like a door. "No," she said. Dr. Marin nodded without judgment. Then came the ultrasound. The room dimmed. The screen flickered. A soft rhythm filled the air, fast and impossible. Eleanor turned her head toward the sound. The baby's heartbeat. She had heard it once before with Grant beside her, checking messages under the exam table. This time she heard it alone, and somehow it felt clearer. Life. Not argument. Not scandal. Not inheritance. Life. Eleanor cried then. Quietly. Completely. Without shame. Dr. Marin handed her tissues and said nothing. After the appointment, Eleanor sat in her parked car with the ultrasound photo in her lap. Grant had texted 7 times that morning. "I have rights too. You cannot cut me out. We need to discuss the baby. Do not let Vivian poison this." Eleanor read them once and forwarded them to counsel. Then she took a picture of the ultrasound and sent it to one person. Mara Ellison, the compliance officer, had somehow become the closest thing Eleanor had to a protector outside Vivian. She responded within a minute. Strong heartbeat. Strong mother. Eleanor smiled through tears. That evening, Vivian came to the hotel suite with soup and strategy. "You need a public plan," she said. Eleanor sat curled in the green velvet chair. "I thought silence was the plan." "Silence is a tool. It is not always the whole plan." "What are you suggesting?" "The gala is in 17 days. Grant is receiving a major award in a venue you own, before tenants, lenders, developers, and city officials connected to your portfolio." Eleanor looked at her. "You want to expose him there?" Vivian shook her head. "I want to disclose ownership there. If exposure follows, that is because he built his lies too close to the truth." Eleanor looked toward the river. "Do I have to attend?" "No." The answer surprised her. Vivian continued. "Your grandmother never believed power required presence. Documents can walk into a room without you." Eleanor imagined Grant on stage, smiling beneath chandelier light, thanking partners for a career supported by buildings he did not know belonged to the wife he had discarded. The thought did not make her happy. It made her steady. What will happen? Every commercial tenant, lender, and institutional partner in the Hartwell portfolio will receive formal notice of trustee control, lease review, and compliance updates. We will time delivery for the beginning of the award program. Nothing defamatory. Nothing emotional. Just ownership. And Celeste? Her boutique receives non-renewal notice separately. Proper period. Clean paperwork. Tessa? Vivian's face remained neutral. Her agency has already requested confirmation that she was unauthorized in trust property. We will answer truthfully. Eleanor looked at the ultrasound photo. Truthfully. That word had become both weapon and shelter. Grant had made her feel dramatic for wanting truth. Celeste had made her feel common for needing respect. Tessa had made her feel replaceable by standing in her cardigan like youth itself was a deed. Now truth would enter the room wearing no perfume, no tears, and no revenge speech. Only letterhead. Eleanor touched the edge of the ultrasound picture. "Do it," she said. Chapter 9. The City Builders Gala took place inside the Grand Veron Ballroom. a restored landmark with a ceiling painted like a twilight sky. Beatrice had bought the building 21 years earlier, when the old owner planned to gut it into luxury offices. She restored the plasterwork, reopened the balcony, and kept the original chandeliers because she believed beauty was part of public memory. Grant had attended events there for years. He never knew he was standing inside Beatrice's stubbornness. On the night of the gala, he arrived at 6:40 in a black tuxedo. Celeste came beside him in champagne silk, diamonds at her throat, her face arranged into a serene mask that hid nothing from anyone who knew where to look. Tessa arrived separately, despite Grant advising her to stay away. She wore red. That was Tessa's first mistake. In a room full of lenders, spouses, city officials, and donors who had spent the week watching clips of her removal from the penthouse, red did not read as confidence. It read as appetite. Grant saw her near the entrance and went cold. "What are you doing here?" She smiled for nearby cameras. "Supporting you." "Do not." Her smile remained. "Too late. People already saw me." Grant understood then that Tessa was not there for love or loyalty. She was there because if his name recovered, she wanted to be photographed near the recovery. Celeste touched his sleeve. "Keep your expression pleasant." Grant did. He was good at performance. For the first hour, it almost worked. People greeted him. Some warmly, some cautiously. Henry Ward introduced him to a bank director, as if nothing had shifted. The wine was good. The string quartet played near the balcony. Tessa laughed beside a group of younger associates, pretending not to watch every important person in the room. Grant began to breathe again. At 8:05, the program began. At 8:22, the first phones vibrated. The initial notice went to commercial tenants. Formal disclosure of trustee control and portfolio compliance review. Hartwell Urban Trust confirmed Eleanor Hayes Mercer as sole controlling trustee of the attached portfolio, including Westbridge Tower, Hartwell Tower, Grand Veron Ballroom, Hartwell Arcade, and related redevelopment parcels. At Table 4, a developer named Nolan Pierce opened the attachment and stopped chewing. At Table 7, a bank director leaned closer to his screen. At the sponsor table, Henry Ward read the first paragraph, then looked slowly toward Grant. At the head table, the gala chair received the venue ownership notice and froze with her fork halfway to her plate. On stage, a councilman praised Grant Mercer's leadership in shaping the city's future. Grant smiled. Then his phone vibrated. "Owen Blythe. Do not go on stage. Call me now." Grant's mouth went dry. The councilman said, "And now, the City Builders Vision Award goes to Grant Mercer." Applause rose. Grant stood, because not standing would have looked worse. He walked to the stage through a room that had changed temperature. At the podium, he accepted the glass award. It was heavier than expected. He looked out. Phones glowed across the ballroom. Whispers moved table to table. He saw Henry speaking to the bank director. Celeste reading her phone with one hand pressed to her pearls. Tessa looking around, finally sensing danger but not yet locating it. Grant unfolded his prepared speech. "Tonight is about legacy," he began. The word almost caught in his throat. He forced himself on. "Legacy is not merely what we build. It is what we protect, what we pass forward, what we make possible for those who come after us." A chair scraped. Nolan Pierce stood and left the table, phone pressed to his ear. Grant continued. "When I began in this city, I had nothing but vision." Henry Ward looked up sharply. Another person left. Then another. Grant felt sweat gather beneath his collar. Near the back, the ballroom manager received a call and looked toward the stage with the expression of a man realizing the event itself belonged to the absent wife. Grant's phone buzzed again on the lectern. "Henry Ward this time. Step down before you make this worse." Grant lost his place. The room, which had applauded him 3 minutes earlier, now watched with a kind of fascinated caution. Then Celeste made a sound. Small. Strangled. Her boutique notice had arrived. Non-renewal of commercial lease. Hartwell Arcade Unit 5. Proper notice period. No cause required. Tessa saw Celeste's face and leaned toward her. "What happened?" Celeste did not answer. Tessa checked her own phone. Her agency had forwarded the trust's response. Unauthorized presence confirmed. Commercial filming from private trust property not approved. Brand risk review ongoing. Tessa's face changed so quickly that several people noticed. At the podium, Grant watched her stand. For 1 second, he thought she was coming to support him. Instead, she picked up her silver purse and walked toward the exit. Not quickly, not tearfully, efficiently. the same way she had entered his marriage. Grant saw the truth, then with the brutality of bad timing. Tessa had called herself chosen, but she had never planned to be chosen into consequences. His speech lay useless in front of him. The award felt ridiculous in his hand. The city had not watched Eleanor walk in and destroy him. That was what made it worse. She was not there at all. Only her ownership was. Only the walls. Only the grandmother's paperwork. Grant Mercer stood on a stage inside a ballroom owned by the wife he had thrown out, holding an award for building a future on foundations she controlled. There was no graceful way to continue. Chapter 10. Eleanor did not watch the gala live. She was at Beatrice's old house, sitting on the back porch with a blanket around her shoulders and a cup of peppermint tea cooling beside her. The house sat on the north edge of the city, hidden behind maple trees and a stone wall that needed repair. Beatrice had left it empty except for weekly maintenance. Eleanor had avoided it for years because grief lived there too clearly. Now it felt like the only place quiet enough. Vivian sent one message at 8:47. Delivered. Received. Understood. Eleanor read it and placed the phone face down. She did not need video. She could imagine Grant's face too easily, and she did not want the satisfaction to become hunger. Revenge could be a fire that warmed you or burned down the house you still needed to live in. Eleanor had a child to raise. She wanted warmth. The next days unfolded with strange precision. Mercer Ward Capital issued a statement announcing that Grant would take temporary leave pending internal review of personal conduct and governance matters. Northridge Bank paused financing on the South River project. Henry Ward requested a private meeting with Vivian and Eleanor. Celeste's boutique customers whispered before the lease ended, which for Celeste was worse than closure itself. She had built her power through implication, through invitations, through the delicate violence of being socially necessary. Now people wondered aloud whether she had been subsidized by the daughter-in-law she belittled. Tessa posted nothing for 4 days. On the 5th, she uploaded a black square with a caption about healing away from toxicity. The comments were immediate. Away from whose penthouse? Upgrade to hotel lobby. Healing from consequences is hard. She disabled comments within the hour. Grant tried to visit Beatrice's house. Mara stopped him at the gate. He stood outside in a wool coat, unshaven, eyes red. Eleanor watched from an upstairs window and felt no triumph. He looked like a man discovering that every door he thought was his had hinges he never paid for. Mara called up. "Do you want to speak with him?" Eleanor looked at the ultrasound photo on the desk. No. Grant left after 20 minutes. That night, he sent a long email. It began with anger, moved into explanation, paused at regret, and ended with the sentence men like Grant often find only after power stops answering their calls. "I did not know who you were." Eleanor read it twice. Then she opened a blank reply and wrote, "That was never the problem. The problem was how you treated me when you thought I was no one." She did not send it immediately. She sat with the words for a long time, feeling the difference between response and release. Then she sent it to Vivian for the legal file and closed the laptop. 2 weeks later, the divorce filing became official. Eleanor requested primary residential custody after the birth, strict boundaries around Grant's access until parenting evaluations were complete, full reimbursement of any marital funds used for Tessa, and sanctions related to the false protective order. Grant's attorney pushed back. Vivian answered with documents. The hallway recording, the company council usage, the live stream, the unauthorized occupancy, the spending records, the medical contact messages, the family dinner witness list. There is a moment in every legal conflict when emotion becomes less important than chronology. Eleanor had chronology. Grant had embarrassment. By month 2, he agreed to mediation. By month 3, he had resigned from Mercer Ward Capital under pressure. By month 4, Celeste closed the Mercer Paper House and moved to a smaller town where fewer people knew that her daughter-in-law had owned the floor beneath her feet. By month 5, Tessa left the city. Eleanor did not celebrate any of it. She noticed it the way one notices weather moving away. Necessary. Not personal anymore. That was the real victory. Chapter 11. The baby was born on a rainy Thursday in November. A girl. Eleanor named her Beatrice Marin Hayes. B for short. Grant was notified through counsel after the birth. That had been the agreement. He sent flowers. Eleanor kept the card and donated the flowers to the nurse's station. When she held B for the first time, tiny and furious and warm against her chest, the entire city of properties and lawsuits and headlines went silent. There was only breath, small fingers, The astonishing weight of a person who needed nothing from Eleanor except everything. Vivian visited the next morning wearing a navy coat and carrying a stack of forms in one hand and a stuffed rabbit in the other. "You brought paperwork to a newborn?" Vivian looked offended. "I also brought a rabbit." Eleanor laughed for the first time in what felt like years. The laugh startled Bea, who made a small offended sound and curled closer. Vivian softened. "Your grandmother would be very proud." Eleanor looked down at her daughter. "Would she?" "She would say you waited too long, then she would be proud." That sounded exactly like Beatrice. 6 weeks after the birth, Eleanor attended her first official board meeting as controlling trustee of Hartwell Urban Trust. She wore a navy dress, low heels, and no wedding ring. Bea stayed home with a nurse and a monitor Eleanor checked 3 times before the meeting began. The boardroom sat on the 50th floor of Westbridge Tower, the same building where Grant had once performed authority. Now Eleanor sat at the head of the table. Some directors had expected a symbolic trustee. They did not get one. Eleanor asked about maintenance backlogs, tenant displacement risks, accessibility upgrades, underused commercial units, and affordable housing commitments tied to redevelopment approvals. One older director tried to explain net operating income to her in a tone better suited to a child. Eleanor listened politely. Then she corrected his assumption using 3 figures from the previous quarter's report and asked why administrative costs had risen despite vendor consolidation. The room went still. Vivian, seated along the wall, did not smile. But Eleanor saw her pen pause. By the end of the meeting, the directors understood something Grant never had. Eleanor's quiet was not emptiness. It was attention. Attention, properly used, could be lethal. Over the next year, she changed the trust slowly. She created a housing stability fund for pregnant women leaving unsafe marriages. She converted 2 vacant retail units into legal aid offices. She ended courtesy leases that existed only because powerful families liked discounts. She required all trust-owned residential buildings to post tenant rights information in clear language. She established a rule Beatrice would have appreciated. No one connected to Hartwell Urban Trust could use housing as a weapon in a domestic dispute. When the policy became public, reporters asked if it was inspired by her own marriage. Eleanor answered once. It was inspired by the fact that a door can save a life or destroy one, depending on who controls the lock. The quote spread widely. People began calling her the landlord queen, which she disliked. Vivian found it hilarious. Grant, meanwhile, rebuilt quietly and poorly at first. He moved into a rented apartment outside the financial district. He attended parenting classes because the court required it. He saw Bea under supervised arrangements that Eleanor approved only after Dr. Marin and the family evaluator agreed. The first time he held his daughter, he cried. Eleanor watched through the observation room glass and felt grief move through her without knocking her down. Grant loved Bea. That did not erase what he had done. Human beings could be more than one thing. That was not absolution. It was simply reality, and Eleanor had no interest in raising her daughter on lies, even flattering ones. When Bea was 6 months old, Grant asked Eleanor after a supervised visit if they could talk privately. Vivian was nearby. Eleanor said, 5 minutes. Grant looked older. His blonde hair had lost its expensive certainty. He stood with his hands in his coat pockets, shoulders slightly curved inward. I know I do not deserve forgiveness, he said. Eleanor said nothing. He swallowed. I keep thinking about what you wrote. That the problem was how I treated you when I thought you were no one. The hallway was quiet. He continued. I cannot defend that. I have tried. Every version makes me sound worse. That is usually how truth works. He gave a small, broken laugh. I am sorry, Eleanor. Not for losing everything. For making you believe you had to become smaller to be loved. For the first time, his apology sounded like it was not asking for a reward. Eleanor accepted it for what it was. Thank you, she said. His eyes lifted, hopeful despite himself. She stepped back. That does not reopen a door. The hope faded, but he nodded. I know. Eleanor looked toward the room, where Bea slept in her carrier. I hope you become a better father than you were a husband. Grant's face tightened with pain. So do I. That was enough. Not everything needed to become friendship. Not every apology deserved a second chance. Sometimes closure was simply the ability to stand near the person who broke your life and feel the lock hold. Chapter 12. 2 years after the morning of the trash bag, Eleanor returned to the Grand Veron Ballroom. This time, the event was hers. Hartwell Urban Trust hosted the first Doors Open Summit, a private gathering for women rebuilding after divorce, pregnancy abandonment, financial control, and housing instability. There were attorneys, therapists, social workers, property managers, judges, and women who had once stood in hallways holding bags they never should have been given. No one used the word empowerment on the banners. Eleanor had banned it. She preferred useful words. Lease, counsel, evidence, custody, safety, income, door. Backstage, Mara adjusted Eleanor's microphone while toddled between chairs in a yellow dress, supervised by Simone from the hotel. Vivian stood nearby with a folder, because of course she did. "You are nervous," Vivian said. Eleanor looked at the curtain. "A little." "Good. That is comforting. It means you know the room matters." Eleanor smiled. The ballroom beyond the curtain was full. Not with people waiting to watch Grant fall, not with investors whispering over ownership notices, but with women waiting for tools. That was better. When Eleanor walked onto the stage, applause rose, then grew. She stood beneath the restored twilight ceiling and thought of Beatrice buying this place when everyone else saw demolition value. Her grandmother had protected beauty because she believed the future deserved rooms with memory. Eleanor stepped to the microphone. 2 years ago, she began, I was handed a trash bag in a doorway and told to take only what I had personally earned. The room went silent. She continued. At the time, I thought that sentence was meant to shame me. Later, I realized it was a question. What had I personally earned? She looked across the faces. I had earned my education, my patience, my instincts, my daughter, my right to safety, my right to leave without begging, my right to know that being underestimated does not make a woman empty. It usually means someone else has not done the work of seeing her. The applause came, but she lifted one hand gently. And I inherited something too. Not just property. Preparation. My grandmother built quietly because the world taught her loud women were punished and quiet women were ignored. She chose ignored. Then she made ignored powerful. Several women nodded. Eleanor's voice softened. I used to think silence was what happened when I could not defend myself. I was wrong. Silence can be where a woman gathers names, dates, documents, courage, and the phone number of the attorney she was afraid to call. Laughter moved through the room, warm and knowing. But silence should never be the price of survival, she continued. That is why we are here. Not to teach women to endure more gracefully, but to help them leave more safely. To make sure a locked door is not the end of the story. To make sure no one is told they have no future by someone living off the foundation beneath their feet. At the front table, a young pregnant woman began to cry. Eleanor saw her and had to pause. For a moment she was back in the lobby with a trash bag at her feet, opening the navy envelope with shaking hands. Then she was here, standing, not healed perfectly, not untouched, not magically remade into someone who never hurt. Standing anyway. She finished with the words Beatrice had left her. Peace is ownership of the door. The room rose. The applause filled the ballroom and climbed toward the painted ceiling. Eleanor stood still, one hand over her heart, the other at her side, and let herself receive it. Not as worship, not as revenge, as witness. That evening, after the summit ended, Eleanor walked through the empty ballroom carrying Bee on her hip. The staff had cleared the tables. The chandeliers had dimmed. A few programs lay forgotten on chairs. Bee pointed at the ceiling. Sky, she said. Eleanor kissed her daughter's hair. Almost. Vivian approached from the side aisle. You did well today. Eleanor looked around the room. We did something useful. Your grandmother would approve of useful. They stood together beneath the painted twilight. Eleanor thought of Grant, not with longing, not with anger, but as one chapter in a book that no longer depended on him to make sense. She thought of Tessa, who had wanted a life that looked expensive without asking who paid for the floor. She thought of Celeste, who had mistaken cruelty for refinement until refinement lost its lease. Then she thought of the woman she had been that morning. Pregnant, pale, humiliated, holding a trash bag and a door in the same hand. She wished she could go back and tell that woman one thing. Not that revenge was coming. Not that Grant would fall. Not that Tessa would leave. Those things mattered, but not most. She would tell her this. You are not homeless. You are standing inside a life that has not introduced itself yet. Outside, the city shone through the tall windows. Towers, streets, apartments, offices, doors opening and closing under millions of private stories. Somewhere, a woman was being told she was too little, too late, too ordinary, too dependent, too emotional, too heavy, too quiet, too much. Somewhere, another woman was reaching for a document. Somewhere, a lock was changing. Eleanor carried her daughter out through the front entrance of the Grand Veron ballroom, past the brass plaque that now bore Beatrice Hartwell's name in small, dignified letters. Not large, not loud, just permanent. And for the first time in her life, Eleanor understood that legacy was not what people said when the room was full. Legacy was what still protected you when everyone left. Subscribe for more stories about betrayal, hidden strength, and the quiet moment a woman finally chooses herself.